It was meant to be a lazy holiday weekend. The kind where cicadas drone in the trees and front porches creak under the weight of time. But instead of calm, the eastern Midwest became a canvas for horror, a trail of crimson that zigzagged across state lines, leaving bewildered authorities clutching at shadows. The killers didn't stay put. They drifted cold, deliberate, like phantoms through towns that still slept with their doors unlocked. In the heart of Ohio, nestled between rustling cornfields and lonely gravel roads, sat Port Washington, a village where time moved slower and the air was thick with old trust. But that illusion shattered one late August evening when something unholy slipped past the hedgerows. Her name was Ruth Loader. 79 winters had passed through her bones, but she remained sharp, proud, and tethered to life by her family's love and the pills that kept her illness at bay. Cancer had made her frail, but not small. She was a fixture of the town. And then, one evening, she vanished. It started with footsteps in the kitchen. She heard them while resting in bed, soft enough to mistake for a loved one, familiar enough to dismiss. Maybe a granddaughter, she thought. But the figure that stepped into view wasn't blood. It wasn't anyone she knew. By morning, her sister stood on Ruth's porch, a creeping dread in her gut. Ruth's car was gone. Her purse was still inside, but her keys and the cash had disappeared like mist. Sheriff Walter Wilson arrived swiftly, boots crunching on gravel, heart heavy with suspicion. The back door had been forced, splinters framing the shattered lock. This wasn't a case of someone wandering off. It was abduction, clean, fast, and terrifying. The sheriff didn't wait. He put out a regional alert for Ruth and her missing red Buick. Volunteers swarmed the area. The local firehouse transformed into a command post. Bloodhounds from a neighboring county sniffed through fields while aerial patrols searched the grid from above. Time was slipping. Without her medication, every hour meant one step closer to the edge. The community leaned in. Flyers were plastered across shop windows. Shopkeepers whispered prayers between sales. But the trail ran cold. Then came a ripple in the silence. A local woman walked into the sheriff's office, the kind of witness story that never quite makes sense until it does. She'd seen Ruth's car the night Ruth disappeared. Only Ruth wasn't behind the wheel. It was a boy young, unfamiliar, and far too calm. Her memory painted the face in sharp enough detail to build a sketch. Deputies pinned it across town, but no one knew him. He didn't belong there. At the FBI field office in New York, the name Jim Karlstrom rang with authority. A former bureau chief, now tracking the shadow of something vicious. As details reached federal ears, the bureau saw patterns. Too clean. Too mobile. Too practiced. The kind of case that doesn't stay local. The FBI began threading maps and motives, knowing it was a matter of time before more blood was spilled. Back in Port Washington, the mood curdled. The idea that someone or something had slipped past their fences and taken Ruth shook the town to its core. The FBI stepped in with urgency. They expanded the search radius, combed databases, and flagged Ruth's information across 57,000 law enforcement terminals nationwide. They knew what the locals didn't want to admit: this wasn't an isolated act. It was a beginning. Just as the dust was beginning to settle in Port Washington, the sheriff's line rang again. Another call. Another absence. This time, it wasn't an elderly woman, it was a boy. 16-year-old Eric Elliott, quiet and wide-eyed, had vanished from Newcomers Town, a small patch of Ohio earth barely a few miles from where Ruth Loader had last been seen. His parents, voices trembling, told deputies that Eric hadn't come home. He hadn't shown up for work. And the detail that caught everyone's breath? His .22 caliber rifle was gone too. Sheriff Wilson's instincts twisted into a knot. 2 disappearances. One night. A sick rhythm beginning to play out across Tuscarawas County. The FBI watched the coincidence with narrowed eyes. Patterns like these didn't form on their own. Something or someone was orchestrating this. Then, 36 hours after Ruth vanished, a call crackled in from Missouri, nearly 1,000 kilometers away. A red Buick had been found, half submerged in a muddy field outside Fulton. The license plates told the tale before the words did. It was Ruth's. Local deputies from Callaway County approached with care, hearts thudding like distant thunder. Lieutenant Timothy Daimler, a man seasoned by decades of criminal residue, gave the order. Open the trunk. But do it slow. Inside, there was no body, just debris. A green bottle. A crumpled sandwich wrapper from a grocery store back in Ohio. But even that had weight. Ruth Loader wasn't just missing now, she was traveling. Or had been. The FBI took over jurisdiction immediately. A crime that crosses state lines is their kind of story, and this one was written in fear and gasoline. Back in Ohio, Sheriff Wilson packed a bag and drove west. He carried with him a single photograph, Eric Elliott's. A hunch guided him, one that didn't obey logic but screamed louder than reason. Somehow, these two disappearances were tied with rope no one could yet see. That gut feeling paid off. The sandwich wrapper in Ruth's car hadn't belonged to her. She never left trash in her vehicle, her family swore by it. So someone else had been inside, someone like Eric. Agents began showing the boy's photograph around Kingdom City, a nearby pit stop for long-haul truckers and cross-country travelers. It didn't take long. A gas station clerk recognized him. The teenager had been there, tired, thin, eyes flickering with something no boy his age should carry. But Ruth? No sign of her. The narrative twisted. Was Eric a hostage or something worse? The Bureau leaned in closer. They expanded the search beyond Missouri, pulled surveillance tapes, called in behavioral analysts. Every clue, every scrap of presence left behind was fed into the machine. Then came another thread. A second witness. Another sighting of Eric, this time at a highway rest stop off I-70. Still alone. Still no Ruth. The FBI made a difficult call. Eric Elliott, once a missing person, was now their prime suspect. And that changed everything. As dusk rolled over Missouri's countryside, officers canvassed the quiet terrain where Ruth's red Buick had been abandoned. The fields were windless. The stillness carried weight, the kind that made seasoned deputies twitch. Something was off. Then came the call that shifted everything. A deputy, doing a standard knock-and-check at a farmhouse near the field, noticed the Brewer residents sat quiet. Too quiet. Their car was missing. But the window stood untouched, the door undisturbed. Figuring the elderly couple had simply stepped out, he left. It was a mistake he would remember for the rest of his career. Hours later, a neighbor reported something was wrong. Inside the Brewer basement, the scene was carnage dressed in silence. William and Flossy Brewer, 86 and 74 years old, lay bound and executed with clinical precision. Their hands were tied behind them, telephone cords knotted with speed and cruelty. 3 bullets each. Close range. .22 caliber. The family dog, loyal to a fault, refused to leave their side. Lieutenant Daimler stood over the bodies, eyes hard. This wasn't random. This was a routine, a method developing in blood. The FBI was already on site. Their forensic team swept the home, cataloging footprints, examining fibers, lifting prints. It was the Bureau's precision that spotted the detail, 2 distinct shoe imprints near the door. One was narrow, likely Eric's. The other, wider, heavier. Military tread. Hiking boots. This wasn't a boy acting alone. There was another man. And with that, the FBI's profile shifted. This wasn't one lost teen spiraling into chaos. This was a duo. A killer pairing. And if the murders had a pattern, they had a future. The Bureau now feared this wouldn't stop until someone stopped them. Back in Ohio, the threads began to pull taut. An acquaintance of Eric Elliott, pale, nervous, twisting his hands as he spoke, gave agents the name they were looking for: Louis Gilbert. 22 years old. Just out of prison. A resume thick with theft, violence, and child abuse. He and Eric had grown close over the past month, a bond forged in anger and fantasy. Eric spoke often of escaping Ohio. Gilbert just wanted to run. Together, they decided to disappear. The FBI wasted no time. Federal warrants were issued. Photos of both men were circulated across every patrol car from Kansas to the coast. They were armed. Dangerous. And now, they were serial killers. Then, a flicker of movement appeared on the Bureau's radar. Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Agents located Gilbert's mother. When they knocked, her face fell. They were just here, she admitted. The Oldsmobile parked out front the night before, the one stolen from the murdered Brewer couple, had now vanished. Gilbert and Eric had arrived under the guise of borrowed time, stayed a few hours, then headed west. Toward California. The FBI tightened the noose. They questioned the mother, collected clothing descriptions, traced their next likely stop. This wasn't just an arrest anymore. It was a chase. And the clock was ticking. The Bureau knew one thing for sure: these two weren't done. They were moving fast. And wherever they stopped next, someone would die. The next morning, Oklahoma woke to sirens. Near the wooded banks of Draper Lake, a man on a dirt bike veered off trail and stumbled into something that made his breath catch in his throat. Half hidden by branches and brush, the body of a woman lay motionless beneath the canopy. Her name was Roxy Rudel, 30 years old, marina worker, known for her kindness and quiet routines. She had been shot 3 times, .22 caliber rounds, the same brutal signature left behind in Missouri. But the killing wasn't the only clue. Just beyond the tree line, idling at the trail's edge, was a gray Oldsmobile with Missouri plates. The same one stolen from William and Flossie Brewer. Its doors hung open like a gaping mouth, keys missing, but evidence left behind like a trail of breadcrumbs. The FBI swept in like a storm. Evidence technicians fanned out, swabbing, dusting, photographing every angle. Inside the car, and used ammunition, a pawn shop receipt, fingerprints matching both Eric Elliott and Louis Gilbert. No doubt. The ghosts had passed through here. By now, the Bureau had built a full behavioral profile. Gilbert, the older, manipulative ex-con, was pulling the strings. Elliott, the runaway teen, was following, but following willingly. Their bond had morphed into something predatory, violent, and unstoppable. Together, they moved not with purpose, but with hunger. Investigators tracked the receipt to a pawn shop in Oklahoma City. When agents showed the clerk the fugitives' photographs, he nodded grimly. "They were here yesterday," he said. "Traded a set of tools and some video games. And better yet, the transaction was caught on surveillance tape. For the first time, law enforcement had footage. Faces. Movements. Clothing. A timestamp. The duo was still in Oklahoma. The FBI sounded the alarm. Highway patrol, local sheriffs, even truck stop attendants were briefed and armed with flyers. Every rest stop became a checkpoint. Every gas station a trap. The Bureau wasn't chasing anymore. It was closing in. Then, another ripple on the wire. Outside Santa Fe in New Mexico, an elderly couple phoned 911. 2 young men had approached their property, claiming their car had broken down. Something about their story, about the way they avoided eye contact, triggered alarm bells. The couple declined to help, and moments later, as construction workers approached, the strangers slipped away. Descriptions matched. It was them. But they were on foot now. Which meant something critical: the killers no longer had transportation. The pattern was clear. Every time they needed a ride, someone died. Now stranded, they were hunting again. The New Mexico sun is merciless, high and hard, painting everything in sharp shadows. And somewhere beneath that blistered sky, two killers drifted westward on borrowed time. After the Santa Fe sighting, calls began trickling in like faint echoes. A trucker, voice tight with regret, reported that he'd picked up two hitchhikers the night before, two young men, quiet, thin, hungry-looking. They'd said their car was stuck. He dropped them off at a shopping center just outside town. Only the next morning, when the news broke, did he realize the truth. He had given a ride to Eric Elliott and Louis Gilbert. FBI agents descended on the area like a net cast wide. Surveillance cameras. Parking lot logs. Witness interviews. But again, the fugitives had already vanished. It was the same pattern, always a step ahead, always just out of reach. But the cracks in their plan were beginning to show. The Bureau knew that without a vehicle, Gilbert and Elliott were exposed. Hitchhiking would only take them so far. They were growing desperate, and desperation leads to mistakes. So law enforcement shifted tactics. Instead of chasing, they encircled. Every truck stop, highway exit, and roadside diner across the Southwest was placed under watch. 1,000 sets of eyes scanned the roads. That vigilance paid off. A local rancher reported two strangers seen walking along a desolate stretch of Highway 599, southwest of Santa Fe. The FBI moved quickly. Tactical teams coordinated with state police. Unmarked vehicles rolled in from multiple directions. It was no longer a manhunt. It was an ambush. As they closed the gap, agents spotted two figures, slim silhouettes against the pale heat. They ducked suddenly into a drainage tunnel under the highway, disappearing into the shadows. Inside the tunnel, darkness swallowed everything but the sound of breathing. Armed officers took position. Flashlights flicked on. Commands were sharp and unrelenting. Hands up! Don't move! Gilbert stirred first, reaching toward something in the gloom. Fingers brushed metal. A heartbeat away from bloodshed. Don't do it, an officer warned, voice razor thin. For one long second, the world held its breath. Then Gilbert froze. Something in him, survival, fear, or maybe just exhaustion, made him lift his hands instead. Beside him, Eric followed. No shots. No struggle. After 8 days of horror and 4 bodies left in their wake, the killers surrendered in silence. News traveled fast. Across Ohio, Missouri, Oklahoma, the families, the towns, the officers who had given sleep and sanity to this case all exhaled at once. But amid the relief, one name remained on every tongue. Ruth Loader. Because she was still missing. And neither of the captured men was talking. The interrogation room was cold, sterile, designed to break the silence that guilt often wears like armor. Across the table sat two figures, one brooding and unreadable, the other slick with confidence, like a poker player too sure of his hand. Eric Elliott, the boy once mourned as a missing child, now faced the weight of 4 murders. He said nothing. Asked only to call his father. But Louis Gilbert, older, sharper, and far more dangerous, leaned into the moment. He spoke, but not in answers. He offered riddles. Smirks. Phrases meant to control the room. Maybe it was 1. Maybe 5. You figure it out, he whispered, leaning back with a predator's calm. The FBI knew the game and played it better. They worked him slowly, peeling back the bravado until the mask slipped. And then, like a crack in old concrete, the truth broke through. That night in Port Washington, Gilbert and Elliott hadn't meant to kill Ruth Loader. At least, not at first. They wanted her car. Nothing more. But when they broke in and Ruth surprised them, things turned. Fast. Violent. Ruth was overpowered and locked in the trunk of her own red Buick. They drove into the night with her trapped behind steel. Somewhere outside town, near a guardrail on a forgotten road, they pulled over. Gilbert described it without emotion. No remorse. No pause. She couldn't stay alive. Not after that. He led her into the brush, away from the road. And with a single pull of a .22 caliber trigger, Ruth Loder, mother, widow, pillar of her quiet town, was gone. Her body tumbled into the undergrowth. Forgotten by the world. Buried not in soil, but in silence. The Bureau mobilized a final search. Dozens of officers combed the woods near Port Washington, their boots cracking twigs, their voices calling out into trees that answered with wind. Helicopters scanned from above. Dogs sniffed through every thicket. But Ruth was gone, swallowed by the land or hidden too well. To this day, she's never been found. Eric Elliott, just 16, was tried as an adult in Oklahoma. Life in prison without the faintest echo of parole. The court saw not a boy, but a willing participant in horror. Lewis Gilbert was sent to Missouri. Tried for the brutal executions of William and Flossie Brewer. Convicted. Sentenced to death. And still, the question lingered like smoke in a room long after the fire. Why? There was no ransom. No revenge. No logic. Just violence for the sake of movement. Murder without motive. A killing spree orchestrated by a man with no tether to conscience and a boy too lost to resist the pull of his darkness. The FBI closed the case officially. But for Sheriff Wilson and for Ruth's family, the lack of closure is a wound that never scabs. Sometimes, justice is delivered in courtrooms. Other times, it's buried in woods no one dares enter after dark. Somewhere, among Ohio's backroads and overgrown secrets, Ruth Loder is waiting. And the town that once never locked its doors now sleeps with a deadbolt.